Sorry about that. And g'day, friends and fans. Welcome to another episode of An Interview With. With me today is Adrian Lopez, and I'm the author. Sorry. Author of the book Julia's Bedtime Stories. Adrian, please introduce yourself to the audience.
How you doing?
I just had somebody knock at the door. That's why I'm a little flustered. Just give me a moment. You introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, no worries. Hello, my name is Adrian Lopez. I'm an author. Currently, I have one book out. Going to be releasing my children's book called Julianna's Bedtime Stories, hopefully within the next week or two. Just a little background information about me. I was born in Frankfurt, Germany on a military base. My father was in the military at the time and came back to the US at 6 months old and have basically been in Southern California my whole life. I currently have a book out called The Soulmate's Journey, which is available on Amazon and Kindle, Kindle Unlimited. I have, again, Julianna's Bedtime Stories that should be released within the next week or two, basically just waiting on my final proof, and that would be ready to go. And I'm also working on a werewolf book that should be released sometime later in the summer, which is called Lycoan's Bloodlights.
I am so sorry. Just right at the start when I pressed the button, somebody knocked on the door.
No worries.
And then they started banging. I thought, I better answer the door. Oh, it's the cleaner. They've come early, so I had to let them in, as expected. So, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
So actually writing something I've done my whole life since I was a child. I've always written. I've written poems. I've written short stories. It's always been something even in school I enjoyed when I had to write essays. A lot of my reports and stuff through high school and some of college were written and oral. So I really have always enjoyed that. And again, it was something more like therapy or relaxation for me to just sit down and write. And it was always for myself. It was never anything other than the stuff in school that I really ever shared with anybody. Poems and stuff were for myself until I got married or when I was dating my wife, things I would write for her. But other than that, they were always just for myself. It was the actual, being an author and really doing this, somewhat professionally or starting to do it professionally really just came about the end of last year to the beginning of this year. When I just started thinking about doing something for the memory of my daughter, which is why I started doing the children's books.
Tell me more about Julia's Bedtime Stories.
So Julianna's Bedtime Stories is basically, it's a dedication to my daughter who we lost during our pregnancy with her. I have mentioned on Twitter that my wife and I had a lot of fertility struggles that we went through. And we had finally come to the point where we did the IVF treatments and went that route. And we did have an embryo. We found out it was going to be a girl. We did the whole thing. She was pregnant, but it didn't make it through term. At that point, we've already done it for a lot of years, a lot of expense that goes into that. And basically the emotional part of it is just very difficult for those that have gone through it that understand that. And we just decided at that point that we have tried everything we could, up to then. And we just said it just wasn't meant to be. This was, years ago. And we're always trying to think of a way to kind of heal that pain or, kind of help with that pain. And again, I've always wanted to write. And I just sat there one time and my wife was always telling me to try to write as well or do something. And I really thought about it and said, you know what? Why don't I do a children's book in her memory? And I kept thinking about what could I do that's different than what's out there? What can I do that's for her, completely for her and different? And what I came up with is the two most important people in my life were my grandparents, and basically what the books are going to be, and I want to do a series of these, is really what bedtime stories I would have told my daughter anyway. It would have been stories about my grandparents, things from my childhood that we did, places we went, family events. And the first one is basically about the camping trip, which is we used to go to Yosemite every single year for summer, from the time I was probably 3 or 4 till about I was 13 or 14. And though there's a lot of beautiful memories in there that I really didn't want to lose, and this is stuff I would have told my daughter anyway. So this first one is about the camping trips we used to do, but every book in the series is basically going to be about different things that happened in my childhood about my grandparents. So those memories don't get lost. Those memories are passed down, and maybe other families or children can feel the beauty or the love in those stories that I felt.
I haven't told people this. I've been married twice. My first wife, she was pregnant, and in her 3rd month, she had a abortive event where it was quite painful and distressing, and it's even hard to describe what happened to her and the hospitalization, and it tore us apart. We couldn't recover from it. Yeah, she couldn't recover emotionally from it, and we both moved on. And then I got remarried, and well, things didn't work out that either. But yes, I know what it's like to lose pregnancy.
Yeah.
We had twins.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and it's something. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that have quietly suffered through it. And one of the things I'm doing is I do have a Medium account, and I will be writing about the fertility struggles through what we went through, what had happened, and everything, and kind of hopefully be a voice for some of those that don't want to speak about it, because it's difficult. It's not something everybody wants to remember, bring up, or even discuss. So if I can be the voice for some of those and help them a little, I'm going to try to do that, even though it's difficult. It's difficult to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a painful reminder to many, but to others, it is to share somebody, or just to know somebody else has been through it, is a comfort that you're not alone.
Yeah.
What do you do to prepare for a new book?
Well, the 3 books that I have done or I'm working on are a little bit different. So basically, Julianna's books are really my childhood memories, right? Is going through and thinking, what's the best memory that I want to talk about, that I want to put out there, that makes the most sense, or basically what memory would I really have told her in terms of a bedtime story. I'm also doing a werewolf book that I'm hoping to release late summer, and that one is basically, I've always been a big fan of old classic horror movies, because I've watched those since I was a kid, and my wife absolutely loves horror movies and anything Halloween, right? So it's really something I wanted to do. So that one I really did a lot of research for how I wanted to do a werewolf book, because I wanted to do it different. I really wanted to try to do it different than usually what you see in the movies or what you read, and just try to take it a different angle. So I did a lot of research on folklore and some different directions and stories to try to make it a little different out there for the people that will read it when it comes out.
I did the similar thing. I read a lot about elves, and it's really gone away from the folklore. To some extent, I've tried to return to it, to a more human-ish aspect, a more relatable aspect, but keeping not just with what people would call the Tolkien-esque elves, which are the classical Nordic elf, the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
Mm-hmm.
I threw into the mix the flower elves, which are found in the legends of primarily China, but also Korea and Japan, all the way to also the Central African elves, the tall, dark ones. Also the forgotten Nordic elves, the short, dark ones. And, of course, the rarely talked about is the Zealand elves, or the blue aquatic elves. So I went for a full mix, and I probably left out hundreds of variations that are from folklore alone. But I understand what you mean about doing something different, because today we live in an age of cookie cutters.
Yeah. I mean, again, even with, because I plan on doing some other children's books besides the ones from my daughter, just children's books in general. And I've been trying to do it in a way that's different, because a lot of times children's books, and there's nothing wrong with them, I love them, are generally usually animals that act like humans to get the story across. And again, you see that, right? There's a bunch of those out. So I have a couple ideas that I'm working on to do children's books, but basically everything will be children. So they see their peers, they see children just like them, and they can read through the story. And again, just try to do something a little different from what you usually see out there.
Yeah. And what kind of research did you do other than you mentioned folklore?
There's a bunch of stuff I did for the werewolf book. Basically, again, because werewolf are usually, it's either a curse or it's some kind of infection or something, is usually that it goes. So the reason I did the folklore thing is I went back, because the book's going to be called Lycoan Bloodlines, is I went back to the Greek mythology of Lycoan, who was the first werewolf. And his story, I really went into his story, try to see everything about that. And in the story, he basically tries to trick Zeus and feed him human flesh of a slave. Zeus gets extremely angry and curses him and turning him into a wolf. So he essentially is the original wolf, or the original werewolf. So the story starts from, doesn't start at that, but it actually is the bloodline carried down. So I did a lot of research in terms of that to try to see where I could go with there. Did a ton of research in terms of just the mythology of werewolves and different parts of it that have to relate to the moon and the different aspects of the moon. And then I did some research in terms of just, how the moon affects people in general. So just a bunch of different things to give you different angles of a story. So again, it's not just that basic werewolf story that you usually see of, the cursed person that turns on the full moon or something. I try to keep it different. So I try to look at as bunch of different stuff as I could find, different angles, and just keep it completely different. So you can't really, or you won't really expect what's happening or why it happened until it's explained throughout the book.
Very good, because you have with the moon, you have Diana, the huntress. The hunter, the full moon became known as the hunter's moon. You had Athena's moon, the blood, also Aries, the blood eye moon. You also had in Nordic the I forget how to pronounce it, but it's where Lupin derives from, the wearers of the wolf skin, and they attacked on a full moon because it gave them nighttime visibility, because they lived in darkness. They didn't come out, and they only came out at night. They wore wolf skins. And these were the social outcasts. And this is where Viking raiding started from. Social outcasts would come out at night. The villagers would see them row out to sea. And
I touch a little bit on the Berserkers part, because Berserkers is actually my Twitter handle, because I'm a Minnesota Viking football fan. But I actually touch a little bit on that in terms of how they wore bear skins, and how they would seem to be in some kind of trance, and they would, just go running into battle without any protection, sometimes without weapons. And just when they killed everybody, they started fighting each other, trees or rocks. So, I touch on a little, because I was trying to touch a bunch of different angles. But yeah, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I did touch a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, because as Greek mythology became more European mythology, there was a lot of transformation mythology in and around the 1100s to 1200s. And the 1200s is when the elf culture peaked, and that was the last time in Europe for a long time where the old culture was still the dominant culture. From the 12th century to about the 14th century, the Dark Ages, the plagues, the wars, and then out of that came the Catholic Church in the 14th century as the dominant power, and a lot of that mythology was lost. A lot of books were burnt. And it wasn't just. A lot of people think when it comes to book burning that it was just the church. No, it was everybody. They sacked, when they would sack a village or when they would sack a town, they would burn the books. They would say, your culture is now defeated. We burn it. It's gone. It's defeated.
Yep.
And that's where book burning comes from. The defeat of we defeated your culture. It no longer exists. But with werewolves in particular, that is probably one of the most mainstays of the like werewolves, vampires, mainstays of cinematic horror.
Yep, exactly.
I think it resonates still today. The transformation of man, into a beast. Plays into the possession mythology, which I deal with in my book. The belief in magic and old legends that talk of transformative people who would literally transform. And there's a lot of research. There's a lot of stuff to read.
There was a bunch. So I went through a lot and kind of picked and choose what made the most sense for what I was trying to tell. But there's a lot to go through. There's a bunch.
Because a lot of the ancient tales were rewritten in the classic period. Like the Greek gods, I believe, were cut down from 32 to 26. And that was actually the alphabet, 32 to 26, the alphabet, Yeah. That was actually an interesting transformation. I only recently come across that theory that the gods actually were represented through the alphabet.
Well, I never had heard of that. I have to look that up.
Yeah, I forget where I read it. Sorry. But it's out there somewhere. Who is your favorite when it comes to writing or a particular book, a particular author?
So my favorite of all time, and this is something that I read when I was probably 12 to 13, was Jessica Amanda Salmonson, the Tomoe Gozen saga, which was 3 books at the time. First one, Tomoe Gozen. Second one was The Golden Naginata, and the third one was The Thousand Shrine Warrior. And still my favorite of all time are those 3 books and her as an author. One of the biggest things is from a child, I've always loved Japanese culture, love Japanese cinema, especially the old stuff from the 40s and 50s. Just absolutely love it. Love the samurai culture. And her book is basically a samurai saga, but it also brings into it magic, demons, hell. There's everything basically you can want in that saga.
Yes, a lot of people don't know this, but the Naginata was not designed for men; it was designed for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big things is she is the female hero for all 3 of the books. And that again, it's a big thing. I mean, one of the things besides the children's books is I come from a family that's basically all female. I have nothing but sisters and all nieces. And then again, we were going to have a daughter, but just wasn't meant to be. So, a lot of my children's ideas or books are basically to have that female hero lead, to give them that symbol that they can see and know. It doesn't always have to be the boy that saves the day or the male figure, because I want them to have that strong female figure as well. And that's maybe part of it was that saga and those 3 books, because that was an amazing character and just the storyline all the way through. Like I said again, it had everything you could want: fantasy, demons, hell, Japanese culture, samurais. It was amazing. It was an amazing series.
I touch on Japanese culture, early Japanese culture in my books. The Flower Elves, the Hashimoto's rule the empire. They founded it. Now the empire is 9/10 of the empire is female. So in some parts, it's the struggle of the males that they allow to be elevated to positions of power, so that they have male heroes, so they have male figures to look up to. So there's a lot of a different take on demonology. On the redemption of the demon redemption. If you've ever heard of that mythology, that the demon race seeks to actually ultimately redeem themselves in the eyes of humanity. And I touch on that. The Golden Naginata, I actually came across that when I was doing my research into the female samurai and the female samurai culture. That was, I think, about the the Japanese would be the Middle Kingdom, which was actually their Middle Kingdom was earlier than ours. There's about the 9th century. And the because women were forbidden to carry a sword.
Exactly.
And the Naginata was invented to get around that law.
Yeah, and that story, the character is actually, the character is actually based on an actual female from history in Japan. She was just ferocious. I mean, she was one of the most ferocious warriors of the time. But it's that was you're exactly correct. They weren't allowed to carry the swords, so that was the weapon they were allowed, and they were deadly with it. I mean,
it was invented for a meat cleaver on a pole, was which in Western terms is called a glaive, was invented also in the West for actually young men who couldn't lift a sword, because if you've ever tried to lift a Western sword, you know how heavy.
Yeah, they're heavy.
Yeah, they're quite heavy. It's hard to think that people used to spend their formative years just trying to lift a sword, and if they could, they went on to become a knight. So it's quite a tale in Japan. Whereas you had the sons of nobles, because they could afford that time and training and the diet required to build up. You can see the difference. You can imagine you're from a village where the average height is 4'6", and the noble's son who's 5'8", 5'9", and he's carrying a sword, and you can't even lift it. So
Exactly.
And he's wearing armor on top of that, so it would be yes sir, absolutely, whatever you say, sir. So people really don't understand how bad the subservience culture was of those periods. And for women, that was a true period of struggle. I mean, today you get called a hero for breaking, for denouncing somebody. I mean, no, back then that was denouncing somebody, particularly a man, was a death sentence. So they were standing and brave. They paved the way. It's about time, people stopped being adversarial and actually appreciate that you have it easy. Where else do you draw inspiration from? Do you have particular?
My inspiration, again, my inspiration is just from the things that I've grown up loving. Like I said, horror movies in general. I was, basically raised not really on cartoons as much, even though I was, a child during the classic cartoons. But basically, what I always look forward to watching, I would always watch Godzilla, Gamera, Rodan on the weekends. Kung Fu Theater, absolutely, just couldn't wait to get that to see on the weekend to watch. I didn't care how bad the movie was or how horribly dubbed it was. Absolutely loved them. And like I said, I've watched probably hundreds of Asian films, Japanese in particular, even sometimes without subtitles. trying to understand, because I just love the films. I mean, there's some absolutely beautiful dramas in the Japanese cinema that, you know, not enough people have seen. They're just absolutely beautiful movies. Some of the saddest movies you'll ever see sometimes, but they're so well acted and well made, and it's a shame that a lot of those old classics are not more well known.
Here's the problem: people have seen them, but they're Western remakes. The Seven Samurai.
Yes. Seven Samurai, Fistful of Dollars was Yojimbo and Sanjuro. Star Wars was Hidden Fortress.
Yep. And the lip service or the tokenization, where people made billions rewriting other people's work and then giving them a $10,000 check and then calling yourself generous. Bravo. Stunning and brave, which is why we have writer's strike. So I know I said I wouldn't mention it, but it really annoys me that the people who made the money are now pulling up the ladders.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in, unfortunately, almost every industry. There's always the ones that collect based on the work that others do, and it's unfortunate. And sometimes you have to stand up at some point and say enough is enough, and hopefully get some of that back as much as you possibly can, because otherwise it won't stop. It'll continue.
Yeah, because Kiss at Our Theatre used to be a thing when I was a kid, and when Star Wars came out, it pretty much killed it. But now you look back and see how much plagiarism. It wasn't killed by the public; it was killed by the studios, because they didn't want us to know Hollywood was built on plagiarism.
There's so many redos of the old, a lot of the old Japanese cinema, and the problem is none of them do them justice. I mean, the originals are just works of art.
Yeah, plus the acting.
Yeah. Plus the acting. The directing, the acting, the cinematography, sometimes it's just beautiful. I mean, they're just really, really well done movies.
I cannot fault the costumes, the sets. You know, I in my research, I downloaded as much as I can from the digital library, the digital archives of the Japanese cinema, because it's just, even to watch it in a silent film, and the blind samurai, which was remade, I think it's the Right to Haga film, almost scene for scene, and it's amazing. But at least they acknowledged it. There's a lot who don't.
Yeah, that's the Zatoichi series, and again, it's an amazing series. That was a great
one
series.
Of the longest samurai series is Zatoichi.
Yeah, and again, the acting is amazing. I mean, every movie they did, even some, again, when you do that many movies, every couple or so, you're like, that movie wasn't the best of the group.
No.
But the acting was he was dead on with that.
Yeah. And it gave us tremendous, powerful talents like Beat Takashi.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous talent. What advice would you give to a new writer?
The biggest advice I would try to say out there is basically be yourself. Find your own voice. Find what you want to write about. Find what your voice is. Don't try to emulate another writer you like. Don't try to emulate another style. Don't try to emulate even the way something is presented. Find your voice. Find what's genuine to you and true to you, and you'll find your audience, right? Really find what you want to say. The audience will always be there if you're genuine and true to yourself.
Now, you have a lot of stressful things in your life. I know personally that a few writers do profess that they can deal with stress, and they deal with it very well, and some do not get stressed. I believe that writer's block, and you can go back and look at some of my previous videos on this, the writer's block is a symptom, not a disease.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with the stress? Because that's one of the causes of writer's block.
Yeah, so stress for me, basically all my adult life and the careers I've had or jobs I've had have all been stressful. They've all been, 100 miles an hour all day long as you're at work. But basically what I always figured out is you can't control everything, right? You really need to sometimes just take a step back, take a deep breath and say, what is it that I can control? And don't try to attack everything at once. Just try to attack the couple of things that you could control and focus on that, because the worrying about it, the thinking about it, or the overthinking about it is never going to help, right? So you really have to be able to just take that step back, take that deep breath and say, okay, what is it that I can control? Let me start there and let me start working on one aspect of that, knock that out, and then start working on the next one.
And lastly, what do you do when you're not writing?
So other things that I love is I love to cook. I'm always watching every cooking show I can see, whether it's simply recipes. I love just studying, again, how people cook in terms of flavor combinations. I'm not a big follow a recipe guy. I like to see what combinations they do and sometimes try different combinations myself and certain things I love. I've always loved cooking. Have watched my grandmother when I was young as she cooked, and when she passed away, I started doing the full Thanksgiving dinners for the family. And I love cooking. It's something I've always enjoyed. Outside of that, I love sports in general. Have always loved football, American football, hockey. So I love playing it. I love watching it when it's on, and again, reading, and always love lifting weights. I've done that since I played football in high school, and it's something I've carried on. Helps me relax, helps me think. Those are basically a lot of the things I like to do when I'm not writing or not working.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the rough start. Just
No
as
worries.
we went live, there was a knock at the door. I rarely have things out of sync. No, I normally have such things planned well ahead of time and know where everything's going to be. It's just one of those days. And I thank you for your professionalism, and I thank you for your time. Can you explain where people can get your book now and what's happening in the future with your book?
Basically, the best place to go right now is to my website, which is alstorytimellc.com. My children's book.
Your link is in the description below. I put it in.
Yeah. Basically, my children's book, I'm just waiting for the last proof. Should be released, I would think, in the next week or two at the most. But the website will give you all the information. We'll have the links when they're available and ready to go. Same with the werewolf book coming up. Everything's available on the website.
Again, thank you for coming.
No, I appreciate it. I loved it. It was great.
It was a great conversation. I hope that the people out there like, share, subscribe, and over the next couple of weeks, a lot of people get to hear your story and understand your journey and appreciate it as much as I do. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here.
Thanks everybody for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and to support the channel, check out my links in the description below and check out Adrian's links in the description below. Bye now.